Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathing quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
Frost-touched winds drift through ancient firs, their branches murmuring like distant hymns beneath the pale northern sky. Here in the upper reaches of Europe, morning breaks slowly, reluctant to disturb the hush that lingers over mountains, valleys, and slow-moving rivers. Streams weave thin ribbons of winter light through hollows shaped by forces older than memory, carrying the scent of cold stone, deep moss, and stories passed quietly from age to age. Across these northern realms live 3 such beginnings, each born from earth, river, and myth. Cities emerge from these landscapes as if called forth, shaped by visions, by courage, by the faint touch of beings half remembered in old tales. Walk long enough beneath these skies and you may feel it, the echo of something immense, something winged, something colossal and gentle, guiding the first footsteps toward the places that would become home. On a mist-wrapped hill above the Vltava, Prague first shimmered into being through the eyes of a woman who saw what others could not, a city resting in the quiet folds of dawn. Her vision stirred stone and destiny alike, unfurling bridges and towers as though they had only been waiting for someone to notice their shape in the morning light. Farther east, along the bending waters of the Wisla, the early heart of Krakow took form atop a limestone rise once shadowed by a dragon's breath. A single act of resolve turned fear into strength, and from that victory grew a settlement built upon courage, its foundations rooted in the very hill that once trembled beneath a beast's hunger. And in the rolling Franconian countryside, Nuremberg grew where a wandering giant had once passed, leaving deep, gentle contours across the land. Generations later, settlers traced those natural lines, choosing the ridges for safety, the hollows for water, the paths shaped long ago by footsteps far larger than their own, letting the land itself guide the rise of their home. Mist gathers, hills exhale, rivers keep their memory. In this land, legends do not thunder, they murmur, soft as snowfall, steady as the turning of seasons, woven into bedrock and woven into frost. Let these northern cities speak. In their stones and valleys live the echoes of visions, courage, creatures, and footsteps, the subtle guiding rhythms that shaped the world long before history learned to write their names. Prague, the princess vision upon the river cliffs. From prophecy to stone, a princess looked over the river, and a kingdom took shape under her gaze. Cliffs of Vltava. High above the winding waters of the Vltava, the cliffs rose steadily, their stone faces etched with the passing of time. From this height, Libius looked across the rolling hills and meandering river, seeing not only the land as it was, but the potential it held for the people she led. The cliffs offered a vantage unlike any other, revealing slopes where dwellings might rest, clearings where gatherings could occur, and pathways that could carry life through the city yet to be. It was upon these cliffs that Libius contemplated the future, considering both the practical needs of the people and the vision she held for the settlement. Every curve of the river suggested direction for streets, every hillock hinted at the proper place for homes, and every bend in the land spoke of spaces where community life could flourish. The city she imagined was shaped not by chance, but by observation and understanding of the natural world, each decision guided by reason and foresight. Though the city did not yet exist, the clarity of its form took shape within her mind. The river would provide sustenance and connection, the cliffs protection and perspective, and the plains between would allow for growth and gathering. Libius considered how the settlement could endure, how paths and bridges could link its parts, and how the land's own character could guide its construction. Her people gathered near the cliffs, aware that their leader's insight would determine the course of their home. They did not look for signs or miracles, but for guidance grounded in experience, wisdom, and responsibility. In their presence, Libius traced the patterns of streets and plazas, envisioning a city where order, purpose, and care would shape each stone placed, each path followed, and each life lived. The cliffs, the river, and the surrounding hills together provided a map, clear and unchanging. From this vantage, the settlement's possibilities became evident, and Libius understood that the future of Prague lay in attentive planning, careful choice, and the coordination of the community's efforts. The vision was not abstract, but practical, achievable, and destined to take form under her leadership. And so, atop the cliffs, the first seeds of Prague were sown. The city's existence began not with buildings or walls, but with insight, observation, and the recognition of what the land itself could offer. Libius' contemplation marked the beginning of a settlement that would grow steadily, guided by reason, leadership, and the enduring qualities of the cliffs, the river, and the people who would one day call it home. The People's Council. After seeing the potential of the cliffs and the river, Libius gathered the elders and respected figures of her people to share what she had observed. Their presence was not for ceremony alone, but for the careful consideration of how the settlement could take shape. These were the voices of experience, those who knew the land, the river, and the rhythms of daily life that would sustain the community. Libius spoke of the possibilities the cliffs had revealed, tracing with her gaze the spaces where homes might be built, where paths could run, and where the river could carry trade and travel. Though her words were simple and practical, they carried the weight of vision, guiding those who would help transform thought into action. The elders listened with attention, understanding that every slope, every bend, and every rise in the land held significance for the city yet to be. Together, they considered the organization of streets, the locations of meeting places, and the spaces necessary for communal life. The planning was careful and deliberate, each decision informed by the land itself. The river's course suggested the natural flow of paths. The open spaces between hills offered sites for gathering, and the cliffs above promised perspective and protection. Every choice was made with purpose, balancing foresight with the practical needs of the people. The council's deliberations marked the first steps in shaping the settlement. It was not the work of one person alone, but of a community aligned with reason and observation. By combining Libius' insight with the elders' knowledge, a plan for the city emerged that was both functional and enduring. Streets and spaces were arranged to suit the land, and the early design reflected care, foresight, and the natural contours of the terrain. In these moments, the people understood the significance of their role. Each contribution, each decision, was part of a larger design that would allow the city to thrive. Though the buildings had yet to rise, the settlement's foundation was forming in thought and agreement, ready to guide the hands that would soon shape its walls, its paths, and its life. As the council concluded, Libius looked once more toward the cliffs, confirming that her vision aligned with the practical plan laid out before her. The people returned to their tasks with understanding and purpose, carrying the direction that would allow the city to grow steadily and with intention. In the balance of foresight and experience, the first step toward the creation of Prague was secured. Hands of the plow. With the vision of the city becoming clearer and the council's guidance shaping its earliest plans, Libius recognized the need for a leader who could guide the people through the settlement's growth. While her insight provided direction, the practical governance of the community required someone whose life had been shaped by labor, understanding, and familiarity with the land. The city's success depended upon the steady hand of one who could oversee daily life while respecting the vision she had seen upon the cliffs. From among her people, Libius chose Premisel, a plowman renowned for his diligence, fairness, and connection to the soil. His life had been lived close to the rhythms of the land, tending fields and guiding plows along the slopes and valleys. Though he was of humble origin, his qualities made him suitable to shepherd the people as they worked to establish the settlement. His experience ensured that the practical challenges of building, organizing, and sustaining the city could be met with wisdom and care. The choice of Premisel was met with understanding and acceptance by the elders and villagers alike. His selection embodied a principle that would endure. Leadership is not determined by noble birth alone, but by the ability to act with integrity, skill, and foresight. The people recognized that the foundation of Prague depended as much upon capable guidance as it did upon insight into the land. Przemysl took up his role with quiet resolve, aware of the responsibilities it carried. He would oversee the settlement's development, ensure that the people's labor was directed effectively, and uphold the organization and welfare of the growing city. The river, the hills, and the cliffs he knew so well would provide guidance, shaping the paths and locations of dwellings, while his leadership ensured that Libu's vision could be realized in practical terms. Through this decision, the city's creation moved from foresight to action. Libu's insight had revealed the cliff's potential, the council had organized the plan, and now Przemysl's stewardship would transform thought into reality. The city was no longer only a vision, but a settlement ready to grow under capable hands, guided by reason, experience, and careful planning. The cliffs bore witness to this union of insight and action, as vision and leadership joined to form the foundation of Prague. The future of the city rested in the collaboration of foresight and grounded governance, of planning and labor, ensuring that the settlement would endure and serve its people for generations to come. With Przemysl chosen, the work of shaping the city could begin in earnest, and the first steps toward Prague's lasting presence were secured. Foundations of stone and river. With the leader chosen and the plan set, the people of the settlement began the labor that would transform vision into reality. Libu's insight and the council's guidance had marked the spaces for streets, homes, and gathering places, and now the work of shaping the city commenced. Stones were gathered from the cliffs, timber from nearby forests, and earth leveled in preparation for construction. Every action was measured against the understanding of the land, ensuring that the settlement would rest in harmony with the river, hills, and slopes surrounding it. Under Przemysl's guidance, the community worked steadily and with purpose. Each dwelling, each path, each open space reflected the careful planning that had come before. Though the city was small at first, the organization of its streets, the placement of buildings, and the coordination of labor laid the foundation for growth. The people understood that the strength of the settlement depended upon both effort and attention to the layout that Libu's had foreseen. The river offered sustenance and means of transport, while the cliffs above provided perspective, safety, and reference points for the city's expansion. Paths were directed along natural contours, connecting dwellings to open spaces, ensuring that life in the city would flow easily and efficiently. The placement of structures followed both need and observation, guided by the terrain, the river, and the vision for a city that could endure. As construction continued, the settlement slowly began to resemble the city Libu's had foreseen. Homes took shape along streets that wound naturally with the hills. Spaces for gathering became clear in the open areas between buildings, and the river's course defined the boundaries of commerce and travel. Every step reflected careful planning, collective labor, and adherence to the vision first seen from the cliffs. The work of building was not merely physical, it was a collaboration of foresight, guidance, and communal effort. The people carried stones and timber with understanding of their place in the larger design, and each addition to the settlement brought the city closer to permanence. Libu's observed the progress, confirming that the vision was unfolding as intended, and that her insight and the community's effort were aligned. With the foundations laid and the early structures rising, the city began to take a recognizable form. Streets, dwellings, and communal areas coalesced into a coherent plan, demonstrating that insight and leadership could bring a vision into tangible reality. The cliffs and river continued to guide the settlement, serving as markers for construction, orientation, and growth. Thus, the first city of Prague began to stand, a product of vision, careful planning, and practical labor. Each stone placed, each path laid, and each dwelling erected contributed to the realization of Libu's foresight. The city was no longer only a thought upon the cliffs, but a living settlement, growing steadily and guided by reason, purpose, and the collaboration of the people and their leaders. Voice of the city. As the settlement began to take form, the question of its name became a matter of importance. Libu's, who had guided the vision from the cliffs and overseen the planning through the council and premisal, understood that a city's name would hold meaning for generations to come. It was not a choice made lightly. The name must reflect the land, the people, and the foresight that had guided its creation. The river, which had shaped much of the settlement's layout, and the cliffs, which had revealed its potential, were considered when determining a designation for the city. Every feature of the landscape seemed to speak, not in words, but through the clarity of its form and the guidance it offered. Libu's contemplated the work done by her people and the steady hand of premisal in organizing the city. She recognized that the name must carry both the weight of oversight and the promise of enduring life along the riverbanks. Libu's foresaw a city whose prominence and importance would rise with time, its name echoing in the memories of those who lived there and those who would come after. The name itself was a reflection of its founding, connected to the cliffs where the vision first appeared and the river that sustained it. It symbolized guidance, stability, and a community organized in harmony with the land. The people, understanding the significance, embraced the name as part of their shared identity. It was more than a label. It was recognition of the vision that had brought them together, the planning that had shaped their homes, and the leadership that had guided their efforts. The city's name became a marker of the care and foresight invested in its creation, a reminder that its foundation was both practical and inspired. As the structures rose and the streets took shape, the name carried with it the weight of purpose. Each path, each dwelling, and each open space was imbued with meaning, aligned with the title it would bear. Libu's foresight and the people's labor were united in a single identity, one that would distinguish the settlement from others and ensure that its history would be remembered. In naming the city, Libu's completed another stage of the vision. The settlement was no longer only a collection of structures and paths. It had a distinct presence, a recognized place in the landscape, and a connection to its people that would endure across time. The cliffs, the river, and the labor of the community together gave rise to a city with a name worthy of the foresight that had guided it into being. Thus, the city became known, carrying forward the promise of the vision from the cliffs, the order of the council's planning, and the careful guidance of premisal. Its name marked both the realization of Libu's insight and the beginning of a legacy rooted in the land, the river, and the collaboration of a people united in purpose. Guiding principles. With the city's name established and its early structures taking shape, Libu's and premisal turned their attention to the principles that would guide life within the settlement. Beyond streets and homes, the community required rules and patterns to ensure harmony, stability, and shared responsibility. These principles were not decreed arbitrarily, but drawn from observation of the land, the people's needs, and the lessons passed down through experience. Livius emphasized the importance of collective effort, ensuring that each member of the settlement contributed to its growth and maintenance. She understood that a city built upon insight alone could not endure. Its people must work together, guided by shared understanding and respect for the spaces they occupied. The cliffs above, once a vantage point for vision, now also served as a symbol of oversight and accountability, reminding the community that their labor had purpose beyond the immediate tasks at hand. Premisel applied his practical knowledge to organize daily life, balancing the demands of construction, resource management, and sustenance. His experience with the soil and the river informed the placement of workshops, storage, and communal areas. By aligning labor with natural rhythms, he ensured that the city's growth would be orderly, functional, and sustainable. Every action, from laying a foundation to directing traffic along the streets, reflected the principles that would define life in the settlement. The Council of Elders continued to advise, translating observation into action. They guided the placement of markets, meeting spaces, and communal paths, ensuring that the social and economic needs of the people were met. Through their involvement, the city's framework became more than a collection of structures. It emerged as a living community, guided by principles of fairness, cooperation, and thoughtful planning. In this way, the city grew steadily, its principles reflected in every stone, path, and dwelling. The people understood the value of foresight, labor, and order, and their efforts created a sense of cohesion and purpose. The river carried water and trade, the streets directed movement and interaction, and the buildings provided shelter and structure, all shaped by the guiding principles set forth by Livius and implemented under Premisel's leadership. As the settlement matured, these principles became embedded in its character. The people's respect for the land, the importance of collaboration, and the dedication to maintaining order ensured that the city would flourish. From the cliffs that revealed the initial vision to the careful planning and execution of each building, Prague's foundation was built not only on structures, but on enduring guidance that would shape the lives of its citizens for generations. Thus, the settlement transformed from a mere plan into a living, functioning city. Its identity and continuity depended upon adherence to these principles, creating a balance between vision and daily life. The foundation of Prague was now both tangible and moral, a reflection of insight, effort, and leadership that had begun atop the cliffs and continued through the steady labor and organized governance of its people. Paths of cooperation. As Prague's streets filled with homes and its people worked together to build their new city, challenges arose that tested both leadership and community. The settlement was young, and differences in opinion, priorities, and approach naturally emerged among those tasked with shaping its future. Yet even these tensions became part of the city's development, providing opportunities to define the ways its citizens would live, cooperate, and resolve disputes. Livius observed these early conflicts with attention, understanding that the strength of the city depended not only on stone and timber, but on the ability of its people to navigate disagreement with wisdom and fairness. She trusted that proper guidance could transform discord into learning, turning challenges into lessons that would shape the culture of the settlement. Her insight, combined with Premisel's practical experience, offered a framework for resolving disputes and maintaining harmony. Premisel, accustomed to the cycles of the land and the rhythms of labor, approached conflict with patience and reason. He recognized the value of listening, understanding perspectives, and applying judgment rooted in both fairness and practicality. Whether disagreements arose over land use, allocation of resources, or the organization of streets and homes, his approach ensured that resolution was grounded in shared interest and the greater good of the city. The elders of the council also played a crucial role, mediating differences and providing guidance informed by experience. Their decisions, based on observation and precedent, reinforced the city's developing rules and norms. Citizens learned that their contributions mattered not only in construction, but in cooperation and communication, and that the settlement's success required respect for both leadership and communal responsibility. Through these efforts, conflicts became a natural part of Prague's formation, shaping the character of its people and defining the principles by which they would live. The city's framework, its streets, dwellings, and public spaces, was accompanied by a framework of understanding, fairness, and mutual accountability. These early lessons in negotiation and compromise strengthened the bonds among citizens, fostering a sense of unity while honoring individual voices. By addressing disagreements with measured guidance, the settlement continued to grow steadily. Its structures rose in order and function, while its people developed shared expectations and understanding. The city became not only a physical presence on the cliffs and along the river, but a community with the capacity to navigate challenges thoughtfully, ensuring that growth could continue without fragmentation. Thus, even in the face of dispute, Prague's foundation solidified. Leadership, cooperation, and adherence to reason allowed the city to flourish, turning potential conflict into opportunity for growth. The cliffs, the river, and the labor of its citizens together bore witness to a city becoming more than the sum of its parts, steadily transforming into the enduring settlement that would come to be known as Prague. Prophecy fulfilled. With the city taking full shape, its streets flowing along the contours of the cliffs and the river winding through its heart, Libius and Premisel witnessed the settlement growing into a place of purpose and order. The houses, plazas, and pathways reflected careful planning, practical labor, and the foresight that had first been glimpsed from the cliffs. Every element of the city bore the mark of intention, guided by the vision that had inspired its creation and the steady hands that had turned insight into reality. The people moved through the city with familiarity and understanding, knowing that each street, each home, and each open space had been laid out for their use and well-being. The work they had contributed, whether in construction, cultivation, or maintenance, was now joined together into a community that functioned with rhythm and coherence. Life within the city was shaped by the principles established by Libius and executed under Premisel's guidance, creating a balance between foresight, leadership, and daily labor. Libius observed the settlement with quiet satisfaction, aware that her vision had been realized not through force or command, but through alignment with the land and the people's cooperation. The cliffs, which had first revealed the city's potential, now stood as guardians of the settlement, marking the place where insight and action had merged. The river continued to provide sustenance and direction, winding through the city as it had through her thoughts and plans, connecting dwellings, marketplaces, and gathering spaces. Premisel's role as steward ensured that the city could endure beyond its initial construction. His practical knowledge guided ongoing development, managed resources efficiently, and supported the citizens in their daily lives. Under his leadership, the settlement grew steadily, each addition reflecting care, functionality, and respect for the natural landscape. The collaboration of vision and governance had produced a city capable of stability and longevity. The early challenges faced by the people had shaped the settlement's character, instilling lessons in cooperation, fairness, and shared responsibility. Conflicts were resolved with reason, labor was conducted with purpose, and the guiding principles of the city became embedded in its social fabric. The identity of Prague was now as much a product of its people's effort and understanding as of the cliffs, the river, and the foresight that had guided its founding. As the sun set over the river and the cliffs cast gentle relief across the city, the settlement stood complete in its earliest form. It was no longer only a vision or a plan, but a living, functioning community with streets, homes, and spaces filled with life. Libu's insight, Premisel's stewardship, and the collective labor of the people had created a city capable of enduring through generations, carrying forward the promise of the cliffs into the future. Thus, the legacy of the vision was secured. Prague rose from the careful alignment of foresight and labor, insight and leadership, observation and action. The city's foundation rested not only on stone and timber, but on planning, principles, and the enduring bond between people and place. From the cliffs above, the river below, and the labor of the settlement, Prague became a city whose origin would be remembered, celebrated, and sustained for centuries to come. Krakow, the hill that tamed the dragon. From dragon's roar to human resolve, the beginnings of a city unfolded. Wawel Hill awakens. Long before Krakow's streets curved along the river and its homes lined the gentle slopes, Wawel Hill rose from the earth like a silent sentinel. Its cliffs and terraces overlooked the calm waters of the Vistula, offering shelter, fertile land, and a vantage point for those who would come to inhabit it. The hill itself seemed alive with possibility, its natural form suggesting paths, gathering spaces, and the promise of a community yet to be born. The hill held more than promise. It was home to a creature of great menace, a dragon whose roar echoed through the caves and whose fire left scorch marks along the cliffs. Villagers nearby spoke of the beast with fear and caution, sharing stories of its insatiable hunger and the smoke that billowed from its lair. Even from a distance, travelers could feel the tremors of the dragon's presence, a reminder that this place, though rich and inviting, demanded courage. Yet Wawel Hill's potential was impossible to ignore. Its terraces offered defensible space, and the river's flow suggested routes for trade and sustenance. The natural features hinted at streets, homes, and marketplaces, revealing a blueprint in stone and soil if only someone could seize the vision. Those who gazed upon the hill understood that living here would require bravery, cleverness, and a willingness to face the dragon that ruled the caves below. The people began to speak of the hill as more than a piece of land. It was a test, a challenge, and a prize. Its caves, cliffs, and slopes carried both danger and opportunity, shaping the ambitions and plans of those who would dare to settle nearby. Every curve of the hill seemed to offer guidance, suggesting where a city could rise, safe from harm, with order and purpose. Wawel Hill was alive with motion even before its first citizens arrived. Birds nested among the rocks, and trees clung to terraces as though marking paths for humans to follow. The river reflected the morning sky, a mirror to the aspirations of those who dreamed of a settlement. Every feature seemed aligned, waiting for people whose courage and ingenuity would turn vision into reality. Thus, the hill awakened not merely as a part of the landscape, but as the first character in Krakow's story. It bore witness to fear and hope, danger and possibility, preparing the way for the dragon to appear and the hero to rise. Wawel Hill was the foundation, the stage upon which the earliest chapter of the city would unfold, and the force that shaped the trials, triumphs, and beginnings of the people who would call Krakow home. Dragon's Threat. As the first settlers began to consider Wawel Hill as a place to live, a shadow loomed over their hopes. Deep within the hill's caves dwelled a dragon, a creature of immense size and fiery breath, whose presence dominated the surrounding lands. Smoke curled from the cavern entrance, and the tremors of its movements sent shivers through the soil and the hearts of those who approached. Farmers dared not tend their fields too close to the hill, and merchants avoided paths that might lead them near the dragon's lair. The dragon's appetite was legendary, and its demands imposed terror upon the surrounding villages. Livestock disappeared without a trace, barns were scorched, and the cries of those who had ventured too close spread far and wide. People spoke in hushed tones about its cunning and ferocity, describing eyes that glimmered like molten gold and scales that reflected fire as though each movement were an explosion. Even the bravest felt the weight of helplessness, realizing that the creature was more than a challenge. It was a force that held the land in fear. Stories of the dragon grew with each retelling. Some said it had lived for centuries, emerging from deep within the earth, claiming Wawel Hill as its kingdom. Others claimed it had been provoked by humans who dared encroach on the land, a guardian spirit turned dangerous. No matter the origin, its presence was undeniable, and the hill, though promising, became a place of caution and dread. The people realized that to inhabit the hill, they must find a way to confront the beast. Its fire was not only destructive, it tested ingenuity, courage, and the determination to claim the land. Each attack, each scorched field, reminded them that the dragon was more than a threat. it was the barrier standing between the promise of the hill and the reality of settlement. Despite fear, whispers of hope began to spread. Villagers began speaking of a hero who might face the dragon, someone whose wit and courage could turn danger into opportunity. Children listened to tales of the dragon with wide eyes, imagining both terror and the triumph that might follow. The hill, once a symbol of possibility, now carried the weight of a challenge that would define the city's earliest days. As the dragon roamed, the settlers watched, learned patterns, and prepared. They understood that the creature's menace was not merely physical but symbolic, a test of will, strategy, and courage. The fire it breathed and the destruction it caused became part of the story that would shape Krakow, ensuring that the city's founding would always be linked to bravery, cleverness, and the trials imposed by a dragon upon Wawel Hill. Thus, the dragon's threat established both danger and direction. It became the force that demanded ingenuity, inspired hope, and marked the beginning of a story that would grow into the city of Krakow, a tale of hill hero and the fire that shaped a community ready to rise. The hero's insight. Amid the fear that gripped the settlements surrounding Wawel Hill, a figure emerged whose courage and cunning would shape the city's future. Krakus, known for his intelligence and steady resolve, studied the dragon not with terror, but with keen observation. He watched its movements from a distance, noting the rhythm of its patrols, the patterns of its hunger, and the weaknesses that lay hidden beneath its armored scales. Every approach to the hill became a lesson, each roar and puff of fire an insight into the creature's nature. Krakus understood that brute strength alone would not overcome the dragon. Many had attempted force and failed, their livestock and lives claimed by the beast. He realized that the key lay in wit, strategy, and careful preparation. The hill itself offered clues, its caves and terraces suggesting both hiding places and opportunities for clever deception. Every observation sharpened his plan, transforming fear into a challenge that could be solved with patience and intelligence. The villagers began to place their trust in Krakus, recognizing that courage without thought could lead to ruin. They provided him with resources, stories of past encounters, and knowledge of the land. From the river to the cliffs, from the caves to the open plains, Krakus gathered all he could, piecing together a method that might finally end the dragon's reign. His mind moved like the river itself, flowing steadily, bending around obstacles, and seeking the path that would turn danger into opportunity. In quiet moments beneath the stars, Krakus visualized the confrontation. He imagined the dragon's fiery breath, the tremors of its approach, and the sound of its claws scraping against rock. But he also imagined the victory that cleverness and careful preparation could bring. His plan would require timing, resourcefulness, and the cooperation of those who shared the hill and its surrounding lands. He understood that the dragon's defeat would mark not only safety but the birth of a settlement built on courage, foresight, and human ingenuity. As word of his plan spread, hope began to grow alongside fear. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of Krakus' insight, and the stories traveled across the hills and valleys. The dragon's threat, once an insurmountable shadow, became a puzzle to be solved, a trial that would demand cleverness and careful execution. Krakus' wisdom transformed dread into possibility, showing that even the fiercest danger could be approached with thought and planning. The hill seemed to respond to his preparation, as if acknowledging the arrival of someone capable of understanding its dual nature, both peril and promise. Each observation, each careful note of the dragon's habits, prepared the way for the confrontation that would follow. Krakow's insight marked a turning point, where human ingenuity would meet fire, strength, and the raw power of nature. Thus, the hero's insight illuminated a path through danger. Wawel Hill, once merely a landscape of promise overshadowed by fear, became the stage for cleverness, courage, and the beginnings of the city of Krakow. The first steps toward victory and settlement were taken not with sword or shield, but with understanding, patience, and vision. Trial of Fire. The day came when Krakow was ready to confront the dragon, the beast whose presence had shaped fear, life, and strategy around Wawel Hill. With careful preparation, he approached the cavern's mouth, carrying the implements and provisions that would turn cleverness into action. The villagers watched from a distance, hearts taut with fear and hope, knowing that the outcome of this trial would determine the safety of the hill and the possibility of settlement. The dragon emerged with a roar that shook the cliffs and sent sparks dancing from its fiery throat. Its eyes glimmered with menace, and smoke curled from its nostrils as it moved, each step leaving marks of fire upon the rocky slopes. Krakow stood firm, not in challenge alone, but with a plan honed through observation and thought. He had calculated the creature's patterns, anticipated its reactions, and prepared a method that required precision, timing, and courage. Krakow's strategy relied not on confrontation of force, but on ingenuity. He had prepared a bait, a clever device that would lure the dragon into consuming something that appeared irresistible. The dragon, driven by hunger and the instinct that had made it ruler of the hill, could not resist. Its attention focused entirely on the offering, leaving it vulnerable to the carefully orchestrated trap. Krakow watched, his senses attuned to every movement, every flicker of the dragon's eyes, every shift in its posture. As the dragon approached the bait, the hill itself seemed to hold its breath. Rocks and trees bore witness, the river below reflected the tension, and even the wind seemed still in anticipation. Krakow acted with steady hands, guiding the trap to its final stage, each motion deliberate, each step a test of patience and focus. The dragon, confident in its power, ignored the human presence, drawn entirely to the promise before it. Then, in a moment of precision, the plan was fulfilled. The dragon consumed what had been prepared, and the trap worked as Krakow had foreseen. The fire it carried became its undoing. The clever design turned its strength into vulnerability. Smoke and roar filled the air, but the beast's menace was contained, controlled, and ultimately neutralized. Victory was neither sudden nor violent, but precise, born of understanding the creature's nature and acting with calculated resolve. The villagers emerged cautiously, witnessing the dragon's defeat without the cost of lives lost or homes destroyed. The threat that had hung over Wawel Hill, that had shaped fear and dictated behavior, was no longer absolute. The trial of fire had been met not with brute force, but with intelligence, planning, and courage that respected the hill, the dragon, and the lives of the people. With the dragon subdued, Wawel Hill transformed from a place of fear to a site of opportunity. Krakow's trial demonstrated that careful thought, keen observation, and decisive action could turn even the most dangerous challenge into the foundation of a new beginning. The first step toward settlement had been achieved, and the hill awaited the homes, streets, and community that would soon rise upon it. Dragon's defeat. The dragon, once the terror of Wawel Hill, now faced the cleverness and courage of Krakow. Though wounded by the clever trap, its presence still loomed, and the villagers watched anxiously, unsure whether the beast would rise again or finally yield. Every breath it exhaled carried fire, every step tremors through the hill, yet the plan had been crafted with such care that each movement of the dragon played into its own defeat. Krakow understood that vigilance was necessary until the creature's power was neutralized. He observed its reactions, noting hesitation and fatigue, the slowing of its pace, and the shifting of its posture. Each sign confirmed that the creature was outmatched not by strength, but by foresight. His strategy had worked, turning the dragon's own appetite and instincts against it. Finally, the dragon succumbed to the cunning of Krakow's design. The beast, trapped and weary, could no longer threaten the surrounding lands or the fledgling settlement. Smoke rose and fire flickered, but the terror that had shaped years of fear gave way to relief and awe. The people stepped closer, witnessing the final moments of the creature that had long held the hill in its grip. Celebration was quiet at first, tentative as the villagers confirmed that the danger had truly ended. Fields could now be tended, paths traveled safely, and homes built without fear of sudden devastation. Wawel Hill, once the domain of a dragon, became a space for human activity, observation, and careful settlement. The city's first safety was established, a milestone marking the triumph of wit and courage over raw power. Stories of the dragon's defeat spread quickly, shared from village to village along the Vistula. Krakow became known not only for bravery, but for intelligence and careful planning, the qualities that had preserved life and opened the way for a city to rise. The dragon, once a symbol of terror, transformed in memory into a marker of cleverness, the lesson that danger could be confronted with thought and ingenuity. Wawel Hill itself seemed to breathe a new life. Its slopes, caves, and terraces, once ruled by fire and fear, now held promise for settlement. The natural protection it offered, combined with the removal of the dragon's threat, allowed the earliest inhabitants to imagine streets, homes, and gathering spaces. The hill had been tested, and through the hero's insight and action, it became the foundation for human occupation. Thus, the dragon's defeat marked a turning point. Fear receded, opportunity arose, and the stage was set for the establishment of Krakow. The hill, once a place of menace, now promised community, safety, and growth, guided by the courage and cleverness that had finally subdued the creature of legend. Building from courage. With the dragon's threat behind them, the people turned their attention to Wawel Hill, the land that had been both feared and admired. The hill, now free from fire and menace, offered natural terraces, cliffs, and slopes that suggested streets, homes, and gathering places. Villagers began to plan their settlement carefully, guided by the knowledge that courage and cleverness had opened the way. Each terrace and rocky ledge was assessed for safety, accessibility, and utility. Families claimed plots where homes could be built, stores could be established, and communal spaces could gather the people together. Paths were cleared, not only for practicality but to follow the natural flow of the hill and the river, creating a harmony between human activity and the landscape. The early settlers understood that the hill had been tested and respected by the dragon, and now it could guide them in return. Work proceeded steadily. Stone was gathered from nearby outcrops, timber collected from surrounding forests, and soil prepared for gardens. The people labored side by side, their efforts reinforced by the shared experience of fear overcome, danger defeated, and possibility realized. Every nail driven, stone laid, and wall erected carried the weight of courage and determination. Wawel Hill became not merely a place of residence, but a symbol of what could be achieved when fear was confronted with insight and action. Children ran along the paths, their laughter filling spaces once dominated by fire and smoke. Traders and travelers began to approach cautiously, drawn by the promise of a growing settlement and the story of the dragon's defeat. The river below reflected the activities of the people, mirroring their progress and their careful construction of a community that respected both the land and the story it held. Villagers also began to document the events, ensuring that the tale of courage would be remembered alongside the practical work of building. Stories were shared at the end of each day, recounting the cleverness of Krakus, the menace of the dragon, and the first tentative steps of settlement. These stories shaped behavior, creating a culture of ingenuity, caution, and collaboration that guided every action on the hill. As buildings took shape and streets emerged, Wawel Hill transformed into a living place. Its natural features, once dangerous and imposing, became the framework for homes, public spaces, and routes that connected the settlement. Every structure built was a testament to human will, observation, and courage, a reminder that the hill's promise had been realized through careful effort and bold action. Thus, the first settlement on Wawel Hill rose from the meeting of courage and planning. The dragon had tested the people, the hero had provided insight, and now the land itself became an ally in the shaping of a community. The foundations of Krakow were laid not just in stone and timber, but in determination, collaboration, and the knowledge that courage, when guided by wisdom, could transform fear into opportunity. Bearing the name. With the settlement taking shape upon Wawel Hill, the people recognized that their community needed an identity, a name to signify not just a location, but a story, a promise, and the courage that had brought them together. Krakus, the hero whose insight had ended the dragon's reign, became central to this moment, guiding the people in choosing a name that would honor both the land and the triumph that had made settlement possible. The hill, once feared for its caves and cliffs, now stood as a symbol of protection, resilience, and opportunity. It was natural that the settlement would draw inspiration from the hero who had subdued the dragon and from the hill that had witnessed both danger and resolution. Discussions among the villagers reflected their admiration for courage, the clever strategies that had ensured survival, and the land's enduring presence. Every voice recognized that the name must carry the weight of history, the acknowledgement of struggle, and the promise of continuity. It was decided that the city would bear a name that connected it to both the hero and the hill. Krakow's name became entwined with the land, commemorating his insight, planning, and bravery, as well as the moment when fear was replaced by hope. Thus, the settlement was called Krakow, a name that carried the memory of the dragon's defeat, the vision of the hill, and the courage of those who dared to dwell there. With a name secured, the people began to take pride in the settlement, recognizing that it represented more than houses, streets, and pathways. Krakow became a symbol of human ingenuity, a place where observation, strategy, and courage shaped the foundations of daily life. The name served as a reminder of the events that had transformed the hill, ensuring that each generation would understand the significance of the land and the story that made it theirs. The act of naming the city also unified the community. Elders and children, craftsmen and farmers, all shared in the recognition that their settlement had a distinct identity. Streets, terraces, and riverbanks were not just spaces to inhabit. They became part of Krakow, a city defined by history, courage, and collective effort. Every corner reflected lessons learned from the dragon, the hill, and the hero whose insight had paved the way. Thus, Krakow was more than a collection of buildings. It became a living story. Its name held both memory and aspiration, signifying not only the past struggle against the dragon, but also the ongoing promise of community, ingenuity, and harmony with Wawel Hill. The city, now named, could fully embrace its future, guided by the courage, cleverness, and determination that had brought it into being. Life among the hill. With Krakow named and the dragon's threat removed, Wawel Hill became a place of life, motion, and purpose. The streets, once imagined in the minds of the people, now bustled with activity as settlers built homes, markets, and meeting places along the terraces. Each day brought new work, from tending gardens to repairing stone walls, and the rhythm of life grew in harmony with the slopes of the hill and the flow of the Vistula below. The memory of the dragon remained, not as a terror, but as a lesson etched into the identity of the city. Children played along paths that had once been avoided, while elders recounted tales of fire and cunning, reminding everyone of the courage, observation, and cleverness that had made the settlement possible. The story shaped behavior, inspiring careful thought, respect for the land, and the knowledge that challenges could be met with insight rather than only strength. Commerce flourished as traders and travelers began to approach the hill without fear. Boats glided along the river, bringing goods, stories, and news from distant lands. The settlement grew, streets became neighborhoods, and communal spaces were filled with laughter, conversation, and the hum of daily life. Wawel Hill, once a place of danger, now served as the centerpiece of a thriving city, its natural features guiding growth and providing both protection and perspective. Festivals, gatherings, and ceremonies soon became part of life among the hill. The dragon's story was woven into songs, performances, and traditions, ensuring that each generation understood the trials of the past. Krakow's insight and bravery were celebrated as examples of human ingenuity, teaching that careful planning, courage, and observation could overcome even the most formidable challenge. The city learned to honor both its land and its stories, intertwining practical life with the memory of adventure and triumph. Homes multiplied along the terraces, Streets curved naturally with the contours of the hill, and gardens blossomed where once smoke and fear had lingered. Every action, from building to harvesting, reflected the people's awareness of the dragon's past presence and the careful thought that had allowed them to survive and thrive. Wawel Hill shaped both the physical and cultural layout of the city, providing the foundation for growth, community, and continuity. As Krakow expanded, its story reached beyond the hill. Travelers carried tales of the dragon and the hero, spreading knowledge of the city's origins to neighboring lands. The settlement became a beacon of cleverness, courage, and human resourcefulness, demonstrating that even the most intimidating obstacles could be met and transformed into opportunity. Wawel Hill stood proudly, a reminder of the trials overcome and the beginnings of a city defined by its story. Thus, life among the hill flourished, guided by experience, observation, and the enduring memory of the dragon. Krakow grew not only as a settlement but as a living tale of courage, insight, and community, where each street, home, and terrace reflected the intelligence and bravery of those who had first dared to call Wawel Hill their own. The dragon's roar had faded, yet its story continued to shape the city, reminding everyone that courage guided by wisdom could transform danger into a foundation for life. Nuremberg, the colossus mark on land. Through valleys pressed by the giant's feet, the land opened paths for people to gather and build. Traces across the region. Mist curled over the Franconian hills like a quiet secret, drifting slowly along valleys that had never known human footsteps. The Pegnitz River slithered between ridges, its surface catching the first pale light of dawn, and the forests held a hushed anticipation, as if the land itself waited for something immense to arrive. No villages marked the earth, no walls or towers pierced the skyline. Only the soft undulations of soil and the gentle sway of trees suggested that time was moving with the patience of centuries. Travelers who passed through sensed a peculiar stillness, a weight in the air, though they could not name it, and they hurried on, leaving the empty hills untouched. Then, the earth trembled beneath a step larger than anything the land had ever felt. A giant moved across the terrain, his strides long enough to span valleys in a single motion, yet he walked with a calm deliberation that bent the hills rather than shattered them. Each footfall pressed gently into the soil, forming hollows and rises that held shape long after he had moved on. Stones nudged aside, grasses curled into delicate spirals, and the soft contours of the hills were reshaped with every measured step. The giant's passage carried no threat, no malice, only a quiet power that the earth seemed to recognize, adjusting to his presence as if it had been waiting for this very moment. He paused upon a high ridge overlooking the river, one foot pressed into a broad depression that would later gather water and small misty pools. From that vantage, he seemed to observe the valley below, tilting his massive head as if tracing patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. The impressions beneath his feet formed gentle slopes that curved in unexpected ways, guiding the flow of streams and defining the angles of future paths. Birds scattered into the trees, startled but unharmed, and the wind shifted to sweep along the ridges, carrying away the faint echoes of his presence. The giant moved slowly, deliberately, and the land yielded beneath him, leaving traces that hinted at order rather than chaos. When he finally moved on, the hills and valleys were forever altered. Rainwater pooled in the hollows, mist collected in low dips, and the slopes became natural guides for animals and later human travelers. Centuries passed, and the patterns of the earth endured, shaping routes, resting points, and gentle inclines that drew people toward the same areas where the giant had tread. Travelers and settlers who later came to the region felt an instinctive ease as they moved through the hills, sensing that the terrain had been prepared for them long before their arrival. Without walls, without dwellings, the land carried the memory of a presence vast enough to shape it with a single step. The giant never returned, and no tale explained his origin or departure, yet the hills held him in every curve, every rise, and every hollow. When people eventually established homes along the ridges and valleys, they chose the very spots that bore his imprint, building streets, markets, and homes where the land had already been shaped to their advantage. The first traces of Nuremberg were not made by hands but by feet, enormous and deliberate, leaving behind a landscape that would become the foundation of a city, a place prepared for life long before any eyes ever saw it. Wanderer of vast steppes. The giant's journey continued across the hills and valleys, each step leaving an imprint deeper and broader than any path carved by human hands. He moved with a rhythm unlike anything ordinary travelers could follow, his pace measured and slow, yet stretching across the earth in ways that seemed impossible. Small streams shifted around the hollows of his footprints, curving gently where his heel had pressed, and tiny rises along the slopes formed natural vantage points. The air seemed to hum with a subtle resonance wherever he passed, a low vibration carried across ridges and dips that hinted at the presence of something enormous and deliberate. Grass bent beneath him without breaking, and stones rolled aside, moving quietly with the weight of his steps rather than under forceful impact. At times, he paused mid-stride, surveying the terrain before continuing. His gaze, though impossible for ordinary eyes to measure, seemed to notice every dip and rise, every curve of soil, as if he were drawing a map invisible to the world. In those pauses, the land responded, softening beneath him, forming gentle hollows where rainwater would later gather and raised ridges that guided future travelers. Birds darted through the trees, startled by the subtle tremor beneath the ground, yet they found no harm in the movement. Even the river seemed to bend its course slightly, following the natural curves impressed by the giant's wandering feet. Every element of the landscape, hill, stone, and water, adjusted to the rhythm of his steps, as though understanding that this presence would shape the earth for generations to come. As he moved closer to the wider plains, his stride carried the subtle authority of someone who had seen countless landscapes and crossed untold distances. Valleys stretched before him, forming shallow paths where his feet had lingered, guiding streams and carving hollows that would become instinctive routes for those who followed centuries later. The forest edge yielded to his passage, small clearings appearing in patterns that later seemed designed for human settlement. The giant left no words, no signs, no markers other than his presence imprinted upon the land. And yet, each impression spoke to anyone who looked closely. It was a place shaped by something vast, deliberate, and unhurried, a space destined for life to one day find its place. By the time he disappeared into the distant hills, the earth carried the story of his wandering. Pools of collected rain rested in the hollows, rivers curved to follow the gentle inclines, and low ridges became natural roads for travelers who had yet to arrive. The air seemed to hold the memory of each step. A rhythm echoed in the sway of branches, the movement of grasses, and the rise and fall of the hills themselves. Centuries later, settlers would feel the ease of walking through these curves and inclines, as if the terrain had already been mapped for them by unseen hands, or in this case, by feet larger than imagination could hold. In the quiet of the valleys and across the rises, the giant's passage endured, shaping not just the surface but the experience of moving through the land. People came to understand the pattern without knowing its source, choosing ridges for dwellings, hollows for water, and gentle slopes for trade routes. The hills remembered, and the earth kept every contour, every curve, every impression made by the giant's deliberate wandering. Though the traveler was gone, his presence remained, not as a figure to be seen, but as a force that had prepared the very soil to welcome generations, leaving behind a landscape that whispered of immense, patient power and a promise that the land itself could hold a story for those willing to notice. Imprint of strength. The giant paused once more atop a gentle rise, gazing over the hills that had now fully received the rhythm of his journey. Beneath him, the soil held the impressions of every step he had taken, broad hollows that caught the morning dew and slight ridges that guided the flow of tiny streams. From his vantage, the curves of the land resembled a living map, drawn not by human hands but by the sheer weight of someone immense, whose feet carried not only power but patience. He moved carefully, knowing the ground would remember his steps, shaping valleys and ridges that would become paths for those who would arrive centuries later. Each motion left a mark so subtle yet enduring that it seemed as if the earth itself had learned the form of his presence. As he continued, small clusters of trees and shrubs bent beneath his passing, not uprooted but rearranged into natural patterns that would later serve as natural shelters or landmarks. Stones that once lay scattered across the plain were nudged aside into neat lines or gentle mounds, forming contours that guided the eye and the step. Even the river adjusted to the folds of the land, its water flowing along the curves created by his deliberate tread. Every detail of the terrain seemed to acknowledge him, bending, yielding, and preparing itself to host the life that would one day follow. Nothing was destroyed and nothing forced. The land simply adapted, learning the shape of strength and the quiet authority of a presence larger than itself. The giant's passage carried a silent promise. In places where the soil had pressed deeply beneath him, rainwater would settle and nourish the first shoots of grass, and hollows would become natural gathering points for animals. When early humans eventually wandered these lands, they found the terrain unexpectedly hospitable, gentle slopes to climb, flat rises to rest upon, hollows to gather water, and pathways that guided movement almost instinctively. The giant left no speech, no signs of intent, yet the world bore the unmistakable evidence of his wandering. The hills and valleys were imbued with order born of his weight, giving the land a readiness that would seem miraculous to the first settlers. At the river's edge, he lingered longer, pressing one enormous heel into the bank, molding it into a gentle slope that would later offer safe passage across the water. Birds took flight, startled by the vibration underfoot, and small creatures scurried into the trees, observing the giant as he surveyed the plain. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying away only the faintest echo of his presence while leaving the earth permanently marked. Each indentation, each rise and hollow, had its purpose, as if the giant knew the land would one day host homes, markets, and roads, and that the paths he left would guide human feet as surely as his own. Time could not erase these impressions, for they were written in the very shape of the hills and valleys, a language that only patience and observation could decode. As he finally departed, the land settled beneath the weight of his absence, yet it retained the rhythm of his steps in every curve and hollow. Centuries later, settlers would build their homes along the ridges he had favored, gather water from depressions he had formed, and follow the subtle paths that his passage had carved. The hills themselves bore the story of the giant, a story told not in words but in the forms of earth, slopes, and gentle rises. The imprint of his strength was permanent, offering a foundation ready for life, a landscape already attuned to the needs of those who would arrive long after he had vanished. And so, without speaking, without leaving any trace except that of his immense feet, the giant had prepared the land to become the city of Nuremberg, shaping it with a quiet authority that would endure across the ages. Valleys of Gathering. The hollows left by the giant's immense footsteps began to shape the land in subtle, enduring ways. Pools of rainwater collected in the indentations, reflecting the sky in fragmented mirrors of blue and gray, and the low points between ridges became natural gathering places for creatures of the forest. Deer and boar discovered these gentle depressions, drinking and resting where the earth had been molded with such care, while birds nested in the protective curves created by raised ridges. Even the wind seemed to curve along the hollows, sweeping through them in soft, curling drafts that hinted at the presence of something that had passed long ago. Over time, the valleys themselves developed a rhythm, a slow pulse of life that would one day draw humans to the same places the giant's steps had already blessed. Travelers who wandered through the area centuries later felt a strange ease in the terrain. They crossed the gentle rises without effort and found rest in the depressions without knowing why those spots felt safer, more comfortable, and more inviting than the surrounding fields. Paths formed naturally between the hollows, as though the giant had traced routes meant to guide movement long before anyone walked the land. Animals followed the same lines, creating trails that would later become roads, while small streams ran along the subtle slopes, nourishing soil and vegetation alike. The hills, once empty and silent, now carried a quiet energy, a sense of order that seemed intentional, though no human had yet claimed it as their own. By the time humans began to build along these valleys, the land had been fully prepared. Roads traced the natural contours, homes clustered on the ridges, and marketplaces found gentle depressions that could accommodate crowds without obstruction. The hills, the hollows, and the slopes carried the silent testimony of a visitor whose presence had transformed the terrain. Settlers learned to respect the shape of the land, to use its subtle guidance, and to honor the balance it provided. Each valley, shaped by a foot larger than imagination could hold, became more than a topographical feature. It became a living part of the city's future, a stage for life that had been quietly set long before any person arrived to claim it. In these valleys of gathering, Nuremberg's story began to take form. The earth, shaped by deliberate steps of immense size, provided a natural blueprint for settlement, travel, and sustenance. Generations later, when humans walked the paths, planted the first homes, and built walls and towers, they did so upon land already prepared, already speaking a silent language of guidance and protection. The hollows, ridges, and slopes remained as enduring evidence that the city's foundation had been crafted not by tools or plans, but by a presence so vast and careful that the hills themselves remembered each step. Life arrived to meet the shapes already in place, and Nuremberg quietly grew upon the footprint of a giant, its valleys holding both the memory of immense weight and the promise of human settlement yet to come. Rise of the first homes. Centuries passed, and the gentle ridges and valleys left by the giant steps became more than shapes in the land. They became guides for the first settlers who arrived along the Pegnitz River. They discovered the natural curves of the hills, noticing how water gathered in the depressions, how raised ridges offered safety from floods, and how gentle slopes allowed movement without difficulty. Each step they took seemed to follow the giant's pattern, as if unseen hands had already mapped the land for them. When they raised their first huts and built crude shelters, they chose spots that aligned with the impressions left long ago, unintentionally echoing the paths of the colossal visitor who had walked there centuries earlier. The earth itself seemed to welcome them, holding the shape of their future in its folds. The first homes arose along ridges that provided both visibility and security. Timber was gathered from nearby forests, stone from the gentle slopes, and mud from hollows shaped by the giant's passing. The settlers marveled at how naturally the land supported their efforts, each slope easing construction, each hollow providing water, and each ridge offering a vantage point. Streets formed organically between clusters of dwellings, following the subtle inclines and depressions of the earth rather than rigid, pre-planned lines. Even the smallest detail, the alignment of a doorway, the curve of a path, the placement of a well, was influenced by the terrain that had been molded long before, a silent guide for human life. The settlement began to take shape, each home a note in a larger melody orchestrated by the land itself. Children ran across the slopes, laughing as they discovered the curves of the hills, not knowing why their play felt natural and easy. Travelers passing through remarked on the ease of movement through the valleys and ridges, finding the settlement unusually convenient and comforting. The river provided food and water, the depressions collected fresh water from rain, and the gentle inclines became natural marketplaces and meeting points. Every action, every choice, was subtly guided by the impressions left by the giant. The land seemed alive with its own wisdom, teaching the settlers how to inhabit it without resistance. They learned where to plant, where to rest, and where to gather, all while following paths that had been traced long before human hands reached the soil. By the time the first permanent homes were completed, the settlement had begun to feel like a living organism. The ridges provided safety, the valleys offered water and shelter, and the slopes connected each home in a natural flow. The land itself had dictated the plan, guiding the settlers toward areas that could support life for generations. The giant's presence remained, hidden in the curves of soil and the rise of hills, a silent architect whose passage had prepared the earth for human life. Nuremberg's first homes did more than provide shelter. They honored the shape of the land, acknowledging that life here would flourish because the earth had already been molded to receive it. Every roof, every doorway, every path carried the memory of immense, deliberate steps that had come before, shaping the city's beginnings without a word or a gesture, leaving only the imprint of care and measured strength. Paths guided by footsteps. Paths began to take shape, not from deliberate planning, but from the natural contours of the land. The ridges and valleys, formed centuries earlier by the giant steps, directed movement without resistance, guiding each footfall toward gentle slopes, low hollows, and clearings that offered space for gathering. Families discovered that traveling along these inclines required less effort, that certain depressions collected fresh water for wells, and that the natural curves of the terrain created spaces safe from flooding. Slowly, informal tracks became paths, and these paths gradually connected the emerging homes, forming the first streets of Nuremberg. Each route carried a memory of the giant's presence, an invisible hand that had shaped the land into a ready-made city, even before the first stone was laid. Merchants and travelers noticed the unusual ease with which they navigated the settlement. Paths curved naturally around obstacles, rose gently over hills, and descended softly into hollows, guiding them to clusters of homes and gathering areas. They spoke of the land as though it possessed intention, its inclines and depressions feeling like a language of guidance. People began to follow these tracks instinctively, realizing that the terrain itself led them where they needed to go. Over time, the most traveled routes hardened under footsteps, becoming recognizable streets that intertwined homes, markets, and communal spaces. Though no one knew why these paths felt perfect, each one preserved the footprint of the giant's journey, a silent blueprint for movement, settlement, and life. As streets grew in use, they began to influence the placement of new homes and public areas. Builders chose sites along the most navigable paths, taking advantage of the natural curves that provided stability and easy access. Small plazas formed in depressions where water collected, becoming the first marketplaces, while elevated ridges offered observation points for safety and social gatherings. Each street, each curve, carried subtle evidence of centuries-old steps, shaping the flow of life for those who arrived later. Travelers would remark on how smoothly they could traverse the land, and children playing along the paths learned its natural rhythm, feeling neither the steepness of hills nor the awkwardness of uneven ground. The streets had been prepared by a presence far greater than their own, and in every movement along them, the memory of the giant persisted. The riverbank, guided by the gentle slopes pressed into place long before human arrival, became a key artery for trade and travel. Small boats glided along its curves, following the same inclines and hollows that had been shaped by the giant's passage. Stone bridges and pathways arose along the natural bends of the land, creating links between homes and marketplaces. By the time the first permanent streets were fully recognizable, Nuremberg had begun to take a distinct shape. Houses clustered naturally along ridges, public spaces found their place in depressions, and the river flowed in harmony with the terrain, providing food, water, and transport. The streets themselves were more than passageways. They were reminders of the giant's journey, living evidence of the care and force that had shaped the land. As people walked, traded, and built, they did so following paths already determined, paths that carried the imprint of immense steps, guiding life itself. The city, young and unfolding, thrived along the routes left in its foundation, each street a connection to the invisible architect whose presence had transformed empty hills into a place ready to host generations of human life. Gathering of settlers. The gentle curves of the hills and valleys began to draw the first larger groups of people, each new arrival sensing the land's invitation without realizing why. Families found the ridges ideal for homes, where the earth lifted them above minor floods and provided sweeping views across the rivers and fields. Hollows held fresh water, collected from rains that trickled naturally along the slopes, forming small ponds where children laughed and animals drank. The streets, already defined by centuries of subtle guidance, connected these settlements effortlessly. As more people arrived, they began to recognize a rhythm in the terrain, understanding that the hills and valleys themselves suggested where dwellings should rise, markets should gather, and pathways should wind. In this way, the community formed not through strict planning, but through an almost instinctive reading of the land, a living dialogue between human needs and the giant's lingering touch. Over time, social structures emerged in tandem with the natural geography. Communities gravitated to the safest ridges and most fertile hollows, forming loose neighborhoods and centers of trade. Roads hardened along repeated use, following the subtle paths dictated by hills and depressions. Small plazas formed naturally in low-lying areas, serving as meeting points, marketplaces, and places for communal work. Families placed homes so that every dwelling received sunlight, natural drainage, and a clear view of pathways. The city was no longer just a collection of structures. It had become a living, breathing network, its design influenced by the rhythm of the land. Settlers could feel it intuitively. The earth had prepared the stage for life, and they were actors following cues left long before their arrival. Animals continued to thrive alongside humans, guided by the same terrain. Deer followed the gentle slopes into wooded areas, birds nested in the hollows, and fish swam along the slow bends of the river that mirrored the curves of the hills. Early farmers took advantage of the fertile hollows, planting crops where water and soil had been shaped to support life. Traders and travelers found natural routes across ridges, connecting the settlement with neighboring lands. Each new arrival and every generation of settlers learned to read the land's cues, instinctively following the contours and pathways laid out by the giant's passage. Life expanded in harmony with the earth, as if every hill, hollow, and slope had been waiting for the rhythm of human footsteps to match the rhythm of giant steps that had come before. By the time Nuremberg began to appear as a recognizable settlement, the hills and valleys had fully integrated with the life that occupied them. Every ridge, depression, and curve carried evidence of the original shaping force, the giant whose wandering had prepared the land for its first homes, streets, and gathering spaces. Families thrived, trade blossomed, and the city's layout followed the contours left long ago. The landscape told a quiet story, one of preparation, patience, and guidance, a story that humans lived without fully knowing its source. In the gentle rise of every hill and the deepening of each hollow, the giant's influence persisted, linking past and present, shaping Nuremberg into a settlement ready to endure centuries of human life, growth, and memory. Town raised on the giant's trail. Generations had now woven themselves into the gentle folds of the land, the hills and hollows holding countless footsteps that traced the rhythms first laid by a colossal presence long before human hands arrived. Homes clustered along ridges, markets blossomed in depressions, and streets wound with the same flowing logic that centuries earlier had been pressed into the soil. Each curve and rise, each indentation and slope, carried a memory invisible yet undeniable, guiding human activity as though the land itself had a voice. Settlers walked paths made for them, worked the soil with ease, and built structures in harmony with the topography, finding comfort in spaces already designed by a force immense enough to shape valleys and hills with deliberate care. The city grew without resistance, expanding in all directions while respecting the land's natural curves. Each building, each street, and each gathering space reflected the organic plan that had been laid before human ingenuity came into play. Residents marveled at how well the hills and valleys accommodated life, how water flowed without effort, and how movement seemed to follow a gentle, almost instinctive order. In every home and every street, the echo of the giant's care remained, not as a story told aloud, but as a living guidance embedded in the land itself. The city thrived because the terrain had been shaped for life, and every human addition harmonized with what had been prepared by a presence vast and deliberate beyond imagining. By the time the city became known as Nuremberg, a recognizable settlement teeming with life and activity, it rested upon a foundation older than any human memory. The hills, valleys, and slopes spoke of careful shaping, guiding human activity in ways that felt natural and right. Each generation walked the land with a sense of ease and purpose, following paths created by enormous feet long vanished, yet still present in the very curves of the terrain. The city streets, homes, and marketplaces were all harmonized with a subtle imprint of the giant, whose passage had transformed a wild landscape into a place ready for human life. The connection between the land and its inhabitants was seamless, a testament to preparation, care, and quiet power. As twilight settled over the hills and the last light glinted off the river, Nuremberg's streets hummed with the energy of a city living in harmony with its terrain. Families returned to homes aligned with ridges, markets closed for the evening in natural hollows, and travelers rested along paths that had guided countless footsteps before. The city had become a living testament to a past presence, a record of immense steps imprinted upon the earth, guiding life with subtlety and precision. Though no one saw the giant, all who walked the land followed the patterns he had left, living in harmony with an order older than memory. And so Nuremberg rose, fully formed upon the careful rhythm of those colossal steps, its future written into the hills, valleys, and streets that still carry the story of the giant who came before.